Man, season 1 of the show was so long ago that I really need to update myself on what happened in. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to my review of the Season 2 premiere of Invincible, an episode titled A Lesson for Your Next Life. So yeah, considering that Star Trek is done until at least next year when we get either Prodigy or Discovery, and we're starting to hit into the last legs of the shows that got filmed before the SAG strike that is still currently ongoing, I figured I would jump over to some other shows that I've really enjoyed, but haven't really had a chance to dive into. And I have to say, I did a season review of Invincible, I think over on my main channel when it first came out, but I didn't really do an episode by episode review, but I loved this show. So much so that I hadn't read the comics when the first season came out, but since the first season has come out, I actually bought the entire 3 omnibus pack of the entire series and read all 3 of them since then. So I know now the entire story of Invincible, though I will say it has been a significant amount of time since I read them. It's been like a year and change, possibly longer, since I read the entire comic run. So while it's relatively fresh in my mind, I don't remember every single detail. So don't worry, I'm not going to give any major spoilers for the comics or potential storylines down the road. I may make allusions to some things that they made in terms of changes from the comic series, like, oh, this is an interesting shift, but I won't give any future spoilers going forward. So don't worry about that. But I really loved this series, and I really loved the comic as well because it really feels like something fresh in the superhero genre. Superhero shows have generally been getting more and more stale, and while there have been a few standouts here and there, like Peacemaker or Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse and things like that, it has starting to be feeling that fatigue. And shows like The Boys and Invincible, both by Amazon, are some of the ones that are very much the exceptions, as well as Gen V, which I also really loved as well. I may do a season-long review of that show as well. But yeah, I'm just so pumped to talk about this show because when I read the comics, while I have my critiques of that comic, mostly based in a lot of the just 90s, it was made in the 90s, early 2000s or something like that, somewhere around that range. And a lot of my problems with it are just steeped in the problems of that era of storytelling, such as characters saying, oh, that's so gay or stuff like that, a little bit of homophobia that was emblematic of the time, and as well as some storytelling choices later on in the series. Overall, I think it is fan-frickin-tastic. And this series has just improved it in so many different ways that I felt like I had to talk about this show coming into season 2 because I'm just excited to see what it can do based off of, the fact that it can update this story and fix even those small problems that I had. And I have to say, finally getting into this review, and I'll stay mostly spoiler-free, and then I'll start getting into spoilers as we go along with the episode. I'll try to make that line clear, but I won't do such a big delineation as I do in my Star Trek reviews. But this was a really strong premiere episode for the season that I think very smartly didn't really set up a ton of the major plot lines of the season, though it did a few, but was mainly more centered on the larger character arcs that we have going into this season, especially after the big plot revelations of season 1. I mean, with Omni-Man turning out to be a villain and revealing that to Mark and all of that stuff that happened in the final 2 episodes of that show. I think it was very smart for this episode to really drill down into what that means psychologically, especially for Mark, but sort of everyone around him as well, dealing with these revelations, as well as their own stuff going on too. And then starting to hint at some of the larger plots going on, but really keeping that hopefully for next episode. I think that was a very smart breather to keep, especially since we've had so long to slowly ease us back into the season and just remember where we are in terms of just the emotionality of everything, because the series is so good about making things feel impactful, that to rush into the next plot, especially after so long, would have left with a little bit of a whiplash and not let the stakes of what happened already feel weighty. So I really did enjoy the sort of slower burn that we get with this episode. I also really loved, and this will start getting into some of the plot stuff, the opening sequence of this episode, where we get to see kind of an alternate universe where Mark and Nolan did team up to take over. And I liked the way that, Mark was displayed in this universe, still being very apologetic and still trying to be a good guy, even though a good guy in the sense that he was tamer than Omni-Man and trying to be like, hey, look, we're just trying to help in a very teenager kind of way. And I felt that felt very realistic than what they could have done, which was Mark just being being evil. And it lets there be a realism to even this like dystopian universe that sets the stakes for the real worry that Mark has going into our universe, the series of the story, where he does feel that he might end up like his dad and not realize and become apathetic to the world around him. You even see glimpses in that montage where he gets angry and then holds it back. And he does have that real fear. And I think this opening showed that well, because the easy way to have done this would just been Mark being very over the top, set the stakes. It would have set the stakes for like how things could go bad, but it wouldn't have really honed in on Mark's character journey. And so I think the subtlety of how even the Mark of this universe, like doing paralyzing, Adam Eve in that universe, I thought was just very well done. And then tying into Angstrom Levy to at least have it have a plot reason to be there, not just a stake setter. So this opening sequence was a lot of fun, and also reminding us who Robot or Rudy was in the other universe with his original form, his original body. I thought was a good way to set that. Like they use this alternate universe set at the beginning to really just do a lot of heavy lifting for the season, set the stakes, set Mark in motions in terms of his arc by contrast, and you remind us of different developments for the characters. Like, just very well done. Also, Adam Eve's look in this universe, boss. I am here for that version of Adam Eve. So really great opening sequence there. I already spoke about Mark and his opening sequence, thought it was very effective for setting him up and where he's at, but I also really liked Deborah throughout this episode, Mark's mom, because, again, this is a comparison to the comic that, in the comic, Deborah falls into a deep depression and becomes much more of a drunk. And we get little hints of that in this episode, but I like that there's, a more naturalism to it, whereas, again, the comic style of the time that the original comics were written, it just didn't give many of the women agency, especially, Mark's romantic relationships and his mother. They were kind of more just over-the-top hindrances and sort of fell into more tropey versions of women. Not the worst, but certainly not the best either. And here, we're still seeing a realistic portrayal of a woman who is literally seen as a pet by her husband, and also having to deal with a kid, but it's not just so off the rails that she's not there for a child. And I don't want to diminish anyone dealing with alcoholism by any means. I've had members of my own family struggle with alcoholism, but it is not necessarily the over-the-top, like, every day, like they're passed out on the floor and yelling and screaming all the time. That it can get to that point and does happen, but it's either a slower build to that often, and it's also more punctuated with other elements and other moments as well that get to that point. So I liked seeing the starting of that here in a more realistic way that I think humanizes Deborah a hell of a lot more. We then bring in Cecil, who is one of the more interesting characters of this entire series, and I love the flip side of the coin that he always presents that we get to see in this episode, where he presents to Mark when Mark says, let me out there, I need to be different, I need to prove that I'm different from my father, and he says to Mark, like, I need you out there when you're ready, I want you to take care of yourself. And he seems to present that he actually is caring for Mark's goodwill, like caring for his health. But then when he goes and talks to his team, he sort of says, I need him on a short leash. So the real reason that he's delaying that is because he doesn't trust Mark and he wants to be able to have a better sense of control over him, which very much ties into Cecil's just desire for control overall. So I really liked the fact that he can, I don't think either thing of what he's saying is lying. I think he does have some level of care for Mark, but it is also filtered through his desire for control, which is what he's more keeping close to his vest. So love that little subtleties with his character. I also loved meeting Angstrom Levy and the Mahler twins. Both of those characters, or all three of those characters, I should say, are a lot of fun. And Angstrom, again, this is slightly different from some of the comics. His storyline is pretty much right from the comic books. He gets all these other people to sort of get their brainwaves, and sort of like, has this like, I can save the entire multiverse sort of thing to him. And I love his powers too, that he can only move between universes, that he can't make portals within universes. I thought that's just a cool like limitation on a power. I always love that stuff. But I like that he was slightly less overtly villainous in this episode than he is in the comics. In the comics, he's not like a bad guy at the start, but he does start a little bit more apathetic towards other people around him a little bit more. And also at the end of the episode where he sort of takes off the helmet, that in the comics was much more directly Mark's fault, whereas here Mark's sort of the instigator, but it is on Angstrom that he takes off the helmet when he does, and it is sort of like, I didn't want to have blood on my hands, and it causes the accident that sort of disfigures him and leaves his mind scrambled. But I like that it is much more gray in terms of the morality of it, rather than being kind of much more directly Mark's involvement in that, and Angstrom having a little bit more, line in that. Despite the fact that he seems to play like, I am this altruistic guy, and he working with the Mullet twins, he lies behind their back. Like he is not a perfect person even before what happens to him. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. The only negative I have here, and this is present in the comics too, is it's still falling into this trope of like disfigured people being evil and upset because they are disfigured. They get disfigured in some way, and so want revenge because of it. Not really my favorite type of trope. It's a little bit would the term be I guess ableist, I guess would be the term. Beauty standards is kind of a mixture of both. So I'm not the biggest fan of that series, but here at least, or that storytelling method, but at least here it works a little bit better because his brain was also scrambled. Whereas I think there was hints of that in the comics. It may be a little while since I remember, but it was less clear that was the case. So I do think it works slightly better here, but it's still not my favorite trope to peddle in. The only other thing here too is we get a little bit of Rudy/Robot here. I'm glad they kept Zachary Quinto. I was worried that they would sort of cut Zachary Quinto out. I love my Zachary Quinto, so I'm glad that he's still the voice of the robot suit. And I like seeing Rudy's arc here with was it Monster Girl, where Rudy is starting to realize what it means to have a human body again, and be like worried about his own protecting himself, and that causing him to be what he thinks is distracted, and sort of like his own wrestling with like, oh, now I can't just like dehumanize even myself anymore into this robot form. I actually want to care for my body, and that upsetting him. And him not thinking it's a detriment to his intellect and his ability to perform, and that being sort of seemingly playing out in his mind when Cecil sort of turns him down as the leader of the team again. So I think that's a really good starting place for his character arc as well. So overall, I think this is a really strong start to the season. I hope in the next episode or so we start to get a little bit more of the plot moving forward and kicking in a little bit more, because this one had some plot, but it was a little light on it, and I think that was the absolute right choice. And I think episode 2 is a good place to sort of really start moving that and start pushing that forward. So excited for all of that. But that is my thoughts on the season premiere of Invincible. Did you like it? I'm excited to hear all of your thoughts down below. But beyond all of that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.